I'm very intrigued by the hybrid model because I could certainly have a system very similar to what I have, but plug in where I park my cars at the at our, we have like a Quonset hut there where we store boats and snowmobiles and stuff like that. I could just plug in over the winter, and if I go up, I'll just grab the battery, take it over, put it together, plug it in over at the camp, and when I leave, take it with me and plug it back in. Because it does, if it is plugged into an electrical source, the heat systems on those lithium-ion batteries, I assume, would kind of kick in and protect the battery so it doesn't have that freezing issue.
Welcome to I Like Batteries, the show where we explore the world of batteries. I'm Mike Muldoon.
And I'm Jeff Lynch. Good evening, Mike. Seems to be the trend.
It is a trend, but it's even more important today, Jeff. And do you know why? There's something important about today.
I know. We joked about this a little bit earlier today, that it was the longest day of the year, by which we mean the day with the most amount of sunlight.
Which means it was a great day to generate a lot of power. And the battery shed was out there generating a lot of power. In fact, I think the EcoFlow Delta Pro topped itself off, and I think the Delta Max did a good job as well. So they're not all quite, 100%, but 99 or at least 80%.
80%, at least 80%.
That's what we shoot for. And what's also really great about this is, since we talk about charging things off grid, we have a guest today here, and it's a family relative of mine here who's got a little bit of off grid cabin. And so I want to introduce Todd Perry, who's my brother-in-law. Who's Todd? You want to tell us a little bit why you're on I Like Batteries? Because I assume you like batteries because you have some at your camp. Am I right?
Yep, absolutely. No, love batteries, love what they can do for us, especially in an off-grid application. But we're kind of coming up on a unique scenario here where we put a battery system into our camp about 20 years ago, just going on 20 years. Of course, technology has been crazy over that period of time, and we've seen so many changes that as we go through the process of trying to select a new battery or new battery system, if you will, we're kind of faced with way more options than what we were, 20 years ago. So appreciate being on the show today, and definitely interested in kind of vetting through some of the options out there.
Sure. We're glad to have you for sure. And definitely we like talking about these things. And since we've done it for 200 plus episodes, so tell us a little bit about the camp, because it's off grid. There's no way we're getting power via some type of other means up there. Is that pretty much correct?
Well, yeah. The camp is located about 7 miles from the nearest road. So there's no electricity up there. Anything that we have from an electrical basis is either generated by a gas generator, by solar, and by the battery system that we have in place. So yeah, we are totally off grid, no support systems, no cell phone connections. There's really nothing without, power generation. And that's why, having some consistent power generation for us up there is really important, because it's our connection to the outside world. And with the, I have family members up there. I have young kids up there. I've got, aging, parents up there. It is important to kind of have some connection with the outside world, kind of given the people that are frequenting and using this camp of mine. So.
And you said to us that you use it all year round, correct?
Yeah, so use this camp primarily in the summer, but I try to get up there for 1 to 2 weeks in the wintertime, for a little fun in the snow, if you will. It's beautiful up there at that time of year. There's literally nobody. There's really nobody to begin with, but in the wintertime when it's negative 20 degrees, you tend not to see really much of anyone except for a few friends of mine that have camps around the area. So,
got it. And so current application, Todd, with it, I think we talked this over in pre-show. See if I had this right. You have 8 6-volt lead acid batteries in your current application, right?
Yep, 8 6-volt batteries. They've really, given that they're going on 20 years old, they've really been solid piece of equipment. Just have to fill them with a little bit of distilled water every year, a couple times, and they kind of plug along. Certainly, in the recent couple of years, we just haven't got the power generation from the battery. So I think over 20 years, they probably degraded to a certain extent. And that's really why we're looking for a new solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I'd say in terms of the camp, any power hogs, I would say, anything that's really drawn a lot of electricity that you have a need for.
I would say probably the largest pull of electricity on a consistent basis. We do have a TV up there, and I'm guessing that's probably pulling more power than other things at this point in time. We have a couple things such as well pumps. We do have circular saws, and we have other kind of tools that we have plugged in, but we just use those so infrequently that typically it's probably the TV is what pulls most of our power at this point.
I think it's time. It's like an old tube TV or something. Like, you got time for an upgrade on the TV. I think that should go into your budget.
Yeah, no, we've upgraded in the last couple of years, so definitely no tubes up there.
Yeah, that'd be the thing. It's an old CRT, type of Sony CRT or plasma. Yeah, I mean, the good part about that is you'd probably be able to heat the cabin off the plasma TV if it was.
Exactly.
That's just based upon those type of things. Okay, so that's good information. And you said you've got a generator up there that you use, a gas-powered generator, I'm assuming, with it versus propane, correct?
Correct. Yep. We have multiple gas generators just because it's one of those things you want to have redundancy. But yes, we use gas generators, all about 5,000 watts typically.
Okay. And solar that you have, I think you're thinking those around 200 watt panels, and how many?
We have 4 200 watt panels up there. We're looking to upgrade those as well with something a little bit more powerful.
Okay. So for our listeners, we kind of talked through in pre-show because we got a little bit of info from Todd and what he's looking to do. And so, one of the things we talked over is it's potential that, we're going to talk about a hybrid solution here, because obviously lead acid still can be a viable means of powering this solution. But clear, our friends at lithium iron phosphate batteries would be something that we want to do, just because it's going to be more power density. Because right now you thought those batteries are a couple 100 pounds a piece that you currently have.
Well, they're actually, I was looking up the specs earlier. They're 135 pounds per battery. Yeah. So we've got 8 of those batteries. Obviously, it adds up pretty quick. Yeah. Especially when I'm the one carrying them up the hill.
Right, and you have to transport them via boat and over to there, or via a snowmobile if you're trying to do it in the wintertime. So. So Jeff and I looked at some solutions, and obviously there's a bunch of companies out there, whether we're talking Battleborn or whether we're talking something like Brenergy. But if we were just doing a comparable lead acid battery, say a 100 amp hour battery at 12 volts, we're talking in the 30 to maybe 35 pound range in terms of that. And we're talking about $1,000 per battery in the ballpark of that, no matter what brand, around about that. Does that sound about right, Jeff?
That sounds right, yeah. And with varying options, but one of the things we were looking for was batteries that have some sort of heating component in them built into their BMS, so that it can get the battery up to temperature so that it can accept a charge if sun's out and the solar panels are charging up.
Right. In your current solution, Todd, you've got a good charge controller that's working fine for you, so I don't think there's any reason to replace that right now. And you've got an inverter that also seems to be working okay too, right?
Yes.
Got it. So, I mean, I think our major thing that we were trying to look at is how could we be able to replace some of the power needs that you have right now in a different way. And Jeff, what were you thinking? As we were looking at it, you did find some, I'd say, upgraded lead acid solutions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're trying to be thorough here at I Like Batteries, and sort of like the first option that we talked about was, hey, just replace them with lead acid batteries. And there's absorbent glass mat types of batteries, or AGM, and they're also quite heavy, not quite as heavy as the ones Todd has currently, but 100 amp hour, 12 volt deep cycle AGM battery is about $215, and it weighs about 70 pounds. So that could be a drop.
That sounds a lot. That sounds like a pretty good solution as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, definitely something that's better. And I would say the other piece of that is then could we run that hybrid solution and be able to then get some of those lithium iron phosphate batteries? And you gave us an interesting fact that said before you get over to the camp, there is the option to be able to have maybe something plugged in so that maybe you were able to take some of those batteries over to the camp from your primary location. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have a spot where we park cars and leave everything that we can't actually take by boat or snowmobile. So we leave the cars and everything over at a parking area that has a small shed, and at that shed we have consistent year-round power. So we do have the ability to keep things plugged in. In fact, we pretty much all the time we have all kinds of, whether it's off-road vehicles or 4x4s or snowmobiles, they're all plugged into trickle chargers and fully charged when we get up there to utilize them. So I know the system works, but we do have an opportunity to store things over there and keep them plugged in, which I think opens up some opportunities for us as well.
Right. And I think it's just something for our listeners to look at too, is that oftentimes when you are having an application like Todd's where you are going to be utilizing these batteries in colder weather, realize that most of the time when you see rated capacity, is say, I'll give you an example with a 100 amp hour battery, they will say at a 20-hour rated battery capacity. Well, that 20-hour rated battery capacity is usually at, say, 20 degrees centigrade. So you have to be realizing that sometimes when you see these ratings, you may not get as much capacity, maybe 50% of that when you're using the cold. But the hope would be, Todd, you said that most of the time throughout the year, you're getting some type of charge, even if you're going out there in the wintertime. Those current batteries aren't dead. So we could make an assumption, say, you're getting some type of charge out of even your current solar array. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And since we're not up there all the time anyway, I mean, we probably utilize this camp. And I say I have two partners in this camp as well. And between the three of us, we probably utilize the camp somewhere between, 8 and 10 weeks a year. And so it's rare that I would show up there, even in the wintertime, and not have a fully charged, kind of battery system.
And just to go over for our listeners, because sometimes since we like batteries, we like to do a little bit of this. Essentially what Todd has is what we consider is a wet lead battery, lead acid battery, right? So that's something where he has to have demineralized water that he has to put in there. And usually, I'm going to guess there's 6 cells in each of those. Does that sound about right? Usually that's how they're placed or something. I don't know how many cells there are. I just know that I think there's 3 compartments because it's a 6-volt. I think there's 3 compartments that I fill on each battery. Yeah. Yeah. And I think Jeff did go over the other type of lead acid battery that we're talking about is an AGM, which is absorbent glass mat, which is a valve regulated lead acid battery. It's a VRLA with electrolyte absorbed into a glass mat. So in other words, there's not the need to maintain it, I guess I would say, as much as your current application is. That sound right about Jeff?
Right. Yeah. No, and you also, they negate the requirement that the battery remain upright. So AGMs can be put in, on their side. And
that's a good point too. Yeah. In terms of how your storage, what is current storage? Like, is it in the cabin itself? Is it in an outbuilding? Where are the batteries stored right now?
Yeah, so we store them in the cabin. At this point in time, there's a box that we built, which is fully insulated box and vented. So, because the type of batteries that we have, I think the most prudent way to store those is in an insulated box with venting. So that's what we do today. And we custom built that box to specifications to properly vent those batteries as well. So it is inside. And that's just another element that even if it's 40 degrees below zero outside, typically in the cabin, it doesn't, get down to the same temperatures outside, even if we're not there. So, there is a temperature variance of probably a good 20 degrees based on, just the sun that comes out every day and does warm the cabin to a certain extent. So, yeah, so that they are properly stored. And I think when you look at the longevity that we've gotten out of these batteries, we're going on 20 years and none of them have failed, in their entirety at this point in time. The system still generates power, although we tend to drain them a little bit more quickly than we did in the past. I think clearly we've done the right things to get, nearly 20 years out of these batteries. So.
Yeah, no, and that's a great example. And for our listeners, we talk about this all the time in terms of looking at two things with most batteries, and it's essentially, what's the state of charge? So like when you walk up there and you get to the cabin, you're there, like where is it at right now? And then it's, how much life does this battery have? What's the state of health of these batteries? So Todd's a great example of somebody who's taking care of the batteries he's had. He's put them in a state where he's making sure he's not letting, he's going and he's putting his water in there. He's taking care of them in a state that's there, and they can last you a while. So I think moving up to something like a lithium iron phosphate battery makes sense for you, maybe a couple of them, but then keeping essentially maybe even some of your batteries that you have right now as a backup system as well wouldn't be bad. Like and for what I would call lower application activities. And example, I would say if you were just running your lights that you had in the cabin off of your old batteries, that could be something great. And so maybe one of my thoughts of the system is that old system is sitting there. You have maybe a small inverter that works, and like all of your lights are running off that, right? So now you have one system that all your lights are running off. It's great. But now you have your lithium iron phosphate system to run those higher load things. And I know you and I talked a little bit about saying, hey, could I get something like a DC potential cooler or something where you could keep some food for a couple weeks if people are coming up in between. You wouldn't have to run your propane refrigerator for that period of time because you burn through so much propane if you were trying to leave that going, right?
Right. Yeah. And, certainly the propane option, everything, whether it's propane or it's gas we bring up for generators. I mean, once again, all that stuff has to travel by boat, 7 miles, and then, by hand, up 200 feet to the cabin. And it's all uphill,
Yeah,
so
both ways, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I tell my kids all the time.
And backwards in the snow for those young kids who don't know what that's like. Yeah, so literally you could say that for sure, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, it's just lugging any of those things over there is just, it's just a hassle. And, let's face it. I mean, you spend enough on these battery systems, dollar wise, to then have to continue to feed it with fuel, through generators or through the propane. It just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I think trying to be, a lot more eco-friendly with what we're doing, emissions friendly, all those sorts of things it's another factor that's important to me individually as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't think we asked you this in pre-show or I asked you this before. I mean, how many gallons of gas what size containers are you bringing up there? Because I know you have different vehicles, but how much are you usually running through in a generator, say, if you're up there for a week?
That's really dependent on whether or not I have, my kids up there, who are probably just not as sensitive to the power usage, and there's one electrical device, which I didn't talk about, which, doesn't get used when it's just men up there. But when women are up there, we have what's called a macerating toilet. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what these are, but basically if you have your normal, bowl and toilet set up, right behind it is for all intents and purposes, a box that contains a garbage disposal. And when you flush the toilet, all the contents of the toilet go into this box, and then it runs and grinds up everything that went through there. And then it pumps it out through PEX tubing, into our basic waste management system. But it pumps it out in a 1/2-inch tube. So, that system actually uses a significant amount of power. So the question, if it's myself and a friend of mine, we can probably survive on a lot less power than somebody else,
Right. So I think that it sounds like we were saying expandability is somewhat important, right? Like, you kind of have a budget involved, which everybody does when you have one of these applications in terms of, I think we've come to a good consensus that having some lead acid application that you'd have, maybe replacing lead acid with lead acid, but a newer generation of those is good. But then having something that allows for some greater capacity, like some lithium iron phosphate batteries, would be good. The advantage then too is to add some new lithium iron phosphate batteries, and Jeff and I have been talking about this, or as applications get better, I wouldn't be surprised in a couple of years if you start seeing some solid state batteries that come up there that have even higher capacity at a lower cost and a higher watts per kilogram, I should say. So I think that's probably something you can do, because there's been quite a bit of change in batteries over the 4 years that we've done the podcast, but clearly over the 20 years that you've had that camp as well. Sure.
Yeah. Well, the question is, do I figure out a way to get another couple of years life out of these batteries, and maybe find a different methodology for charging the batteries. And, because ultimately to run your charger, to charge batteries, I probably don't need to be running a 5,000 watt generator. I can probably run something a lot smaller than that, which is a lot more energy efficient, So yeah, those are some other options that, we're kind of thinking through.
Yeah.
As well.
Tell us a little bit about, like the wiring setup up there. 'Cause I know Mike was talking about, you can just, maybe if you could repurpose your, existing battery backup system, like what is all that connectivity like? And is it just sort of like wired, like what we think of as a normal house, or like how much control do you have over which circuits run and all that?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's run just like a normal house. So we ran everything into a panel, and from that panel, we then connect in, I guess the panel connects into our inverter, and then it will decide whether the power is going to come from our generator or from our battery system. So yeah, it's fully wired like any normal house would be with a panel. We have I think we have 12 or 14 circuits in there. Most of what we're running are 15 amp. Just because there's not a lot of things that are heavy power usage. We isolate the things that are, for example, the lake pump is on its own. That may be on a 20 amp circuit, and everything else is just on its own circuit.
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely an interesting application. We're curious to see what your purchasing power. We're here for you to kind of get more information of those as we go on with things, for sure. But hopefully our listeners, we got a fair amount of listeners who have some off-grid applications and live the van life and different things. And maybe it's a moving off-grid cabin for some of those folks who are doing those type of things. But I want to just thank you for coming on the show, and look forward to coming on again, just telling us what you actually put up there when you make that decision to kind of get those things in, and how much weight you have to carry up the hill backwards in the snow, for sure.
Well, I know a guy who's pretty fit and maybe wants to help carry these things up the hill. So
yeah, I might be able to take some videos and some things of what the final application is, for sure. So that's good.
Exactly.
Thanks, Todd, for being on. Like you said, all of our guests and everything. Hopefully, you say fully charged, or at least 80%.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you guys.